Welcome back, everyone. It is Dr. Lindner, and we are going to be moving on to the next topic. And the next topic is going to be systems. Now, when you look at these images here, this is what you will see under the McGraw-Hill Connect Lab quizzes that you'll be taking. And I kind of took this from one of the past quizzes. And just to give you an idea where there may be a bunch of these um, squares off to the side, and then you would have to drag and drop these to meet the appropriate picture. Okay, so when we look on the left-hand side, we're looking at the bones. And when we look at the bones, we are talking about the skeletal system. And when I go over and teach my students the skeletal system, I do it in a very organized way where I'll focus on what we have in the center first. So we'll talk about the skull and the spine and the ribs and the sternum. And what we have circled here in the center is what we call the axial skeleton. Axial, the axial skeleton. And then we'll talk about the upper extremity. We'll talk about arms all the way down to the hands. And then we will talk about the femur and the thigh all the way down to the foot. And that is referred to as the appendicular skeleton or the appendages. The appendicular skeleton. Okay, the appendicular skeleton refers to the upper and lower extremities. And I really didn't want to, let me circle the axial a little bit better because there we go. Didn't want to include the pelvis in that. I didn't want to include that there. Okay. The skeleton is really important because muscles attach to them, right? Muscles will attach to the bones. And when muscles contract, they're going to move the bones. That's what helps locomote us and move our body parts. The skeleton is also a reservoir for minerals. We store minerals in the bones. And that's an important concept because it makes us think of osteoporosis in a different way. Your body can leach calcium out of bones if it needs it, right? If you're not consuming enough calcium in your diet, your body's going to pull it out of the bank. It's going to pull it out of the bones. The bones are a reservoir. It's a bank that stores minerals. So if you're not putting enough calcium in your body or you're lacking vitamin D, which will prevent you from absorbing calcium, your body will try and rob it from the bones. It sure will. So the skeleton also protects us. When we look at the skull here, there's no other organ in the body that's completely protected by bone except for the brain. And then we have the spinal cord, and that's protected by all of these vertebrae. And then you have the ribs that protect the lungs. So the skeletal system has another job, and it's very important in protecting the parts of the body, even the pelvis here, that's going to protect our reproductive organs and some of the digestive tract, like the small and large intestine. Let's look at the second picture. We're looking at the neural system. And after a sperm and egg come together, the very first system that forms is the neural system. That's the first system. Now, this may come to a surprise to many people because when women are pregnant and they go for a sonogram, they'll say, oh, there's the heartbeat. Okay, there's life. There's the heartbeat. So many people think that the cardiovascular system may be the first system that forms, but actually at around day 18 or so, that's where sperm and egg come together and the nervous system or the neural system develops first. And from this highway, this highway, communication highway, all other systems develop from it. And simply put, I like to think of the brain and the spinal cord, that the brain is like the roots of a tree, and then the spinal cord would be like the tree trunk, and then all of these nodes coming off of them are like branches. And what we start to see at the end of branches, especially in the springtime, if you're in the Northeast where I am, we start to see them budding. And from buds come leaves, or from the budding, we see fruits. And in embryology, at the end of these nerves are buds. And if it's the lung bud, it grows into the lungs. If it's the kidney bud, it grows into the kidneys. And if it's the lung bud, it grows into the lungs. If it's the stomach bud, it grows into the stomach. So the neural system gives life to all the other organs and other parts, which is why doctors of chiropractic pay very close attention to this highway of communication to ensure that the brain is generating enough neurological output to drive messages down the spinal cord. We make sure that the spine is structured perfectly so that it doesn't distort the messages coming out of the nerves that go to all the other parts of the body. Okay, so when we study neurology, we too will break it up into what we have here in the center, and we would call that the CNS, and CNS stands for central nervous system, and because it's centrally located. And then when we talk about what we have in the periphery, which are the nerves coming out here, and even nerves coming out of the brain, they're just called cranial nerves, and there's 12 different pairs of cranial nerves. We call that the PNS, which stands for the peripheral neural system. So we try and break up these systems into smaller parts that make it a little bit more manageable. So we have the central neural system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the peripheral neural system, which is everything else. When we look at the respiratory system, it's the main function to the respiratory system is we want to take in oxygen, and then we want to push out carbon dioxide. And the reason why we want to breathe in oxygen is this week, when you look at the cell, the human cell with a nucleus, you're going to learn of an organelle that's called the mitochondria. You may remember this from high school biology, right? There's a mitochondria, and what the mitochondria does is that it generates energy in the form called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And the air that we breathe in, the oxygen, has to find a way into the mitochondria so that what takes place in the mitochondria, which is the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, it needs and requires oxygen in order to make ATP, to get energy. Think of what happens if someone's anemic. If someone's anemic and they don't have iron, they can't iron is not around to bind to oxygen. You're iron deficient, like iron deficiency anemia, and there's little oxygen binding to your red blood cells. The number one system, if you can't generate energy or ATP, is fatigue. Okay? All right, so that's the main function of the respiratory tract. And when you learn it, you will learn it in terms of, they usually draw a line, like somewhere right around here, where you have an upper respiratory tract, and then you have a lower respiratory tract. You've heard of someone having an upper respiratory tract infection or a lower respiratory tract infection. We learned that Delta variant of COVID was all down in here, right? Lower respiratory tract. That sucked, I can tell you from experience. But Omicron, on the other hand, was more up here, right? It was more upper respiratory, stayed in the throat, didn't really go down in the lower respiratory tract, much more manageable. Okay, circulatory system. Well, we're looking at the heart and the blood vessels. And the main purpose of the heart and the blood vessels, the arteries and veins, the heart wants to take the oxygen and it wants to pump it to all the parts of the body. That's it. That's really it. It's also going to bring nutrients to parts of the body and move waste products out, right? It's another highway, if you would. It moves nutrition, it moves water, it moves oxygen, it moves carbon dioxide, right? It moves it to where it needs to be, either out of the body or into cells and tissues. It also helps to move hormones throughout the body, right? The endocrine system uses the blood vessels in order to move hormones from one part to another part. Then, after you eat food and we need to get rid of waste products, we have the urinary system. And urinary system involves two kidneys, two ureters, a urinary bladder, and a urethra. You got two kidneys, two ureters, one urinary bladder, and a urethra. And the urinary system is trying to help us get rid of waste products. And whenever we do a physical examination on a patient, we always want to ask, right? How many times do you pee a day? How many times do you urinate a day? Because it can give us a clue as to what's happening with that individual metabolically. Someone says they pee 3, 4 times a day. Fine, nothing wrong with that. Someone says they're peeing 20 to 30 times a day. There's something not right about that. Someone peeing only once a day or none, there's a problem with that. And I've seen both of these in my practice. Okay. It could be something as failure, or it could be tumors, or it could be brain issues. I had a young lady that came to see me who had a problem with her frontal lobe of her brain. When she came to see me, here was a young lady that was making impulsive decisions. She said, I make poor decisions about tattoos, alcohol, drugs, men in my life. I said, really? She said, and then I, I just have to deal with the consequences of my poor decisions. So when she told me that in our dialogue, I knew that there was a frontal lobe issue, because the frontal lobe of the brain is supposed to inhibit your impulsiveness. It slows things down. Think of a baby when they're born. And when a baby borns, their breathing is fast and their heart rate is fast. And their breathing is quick and their heart rate is quick because the brain has not fully developed, especially the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe is higher order executive decision making and inhibits behavior so that you don't push your little brother or sister down the stairs, right? You know that there's consequences. But if the frontal lobe isn't developed, the baby's heart is racing. They need a diaper because they pee and they poop. They have no control. But as the child gets older and the brain develops, then they can say, Mommy, Daddy, I have to go to the bathroom. They can control it better. Think of what happens as a person as they get older, 95, 100 years old, 105. The brain starts to break down a little bit, and the person is back in diapers, right? Adult diapers. They're wearing Depends. They don't have great bladder control or bowel control. So the lady that came to see me for treatment was having frontal lobe issues that needed to be activated. And once we gave her treatment to activate her frontal lobe, her urination went from 30 times a day to 3 times in the first treatment. Pretty amazing how that works. Digestive system. Well, we eat food, and it breaks them down due to mechanical digestion that we have in the mouth and some chemical digestion we have in the mouth. And we have lots of chemical digestion happening here in the rest of the gastrointestinal tract. And we have main digestive parts, like the mouth is a main digestive part. The stomach, we have the small intestine, and then we have the large intestine going this way. Then you have the stomach over here, of course. Those are the main parts, right? The esophagus is a main part. But then we have accessory parts, like the salivary glands in the mouth is an accessory part. The liver is an accessory part. The pancreas is an accessory part. These are main players in terms of the assist in the process, but they're not the primary organs like the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine. They just have synergistic roles in breaking down the food. And again, the only reason why we eat proteins, carbs, and fat is to break them down, to bring them into the mitochondria in the form of triglycerides or glucose or amino acids so that we can produce more energy, ATP. Integumentary, well, that's the skin, hair, and nails, and that is the first line of defense of your immune system, is this external barrier. It protects everything on the inside. So the integumentary, especially the skin, then you have the hair and the nails, still part of the integumentary system. That's your first line of defense, first part of the immune system. Endocrine system, we have a bunch of endocrine glands that produce hormones that are chemical messengers. The kidneys have secreting cells that are involved in secreting hormones. The pancreas, the thyroid, the pineal gland, the testes, the ovaries, they're all involved somehow with the endocrine system. The muscular system, well, we're going to address this just like we did the bones, where we will focus on the axial muscles, and then we'll focus on the appendicular, the upper and the lower extremities. And muscles contract and they generate heat when they contract. That's why we sweat, because it gets hot with the heat that's generated. And muscles attach to bones and they help move bones. And there's two other types of muscles besides the ones that we see here. There's cardiac muscle, which refers to the heart. So this cardiac muscle. And then there's smooth muscle. Smooth muscle surrounds our organs. And then we have the lymphatic system. Lymphatic is part of the immune system. It's part of the internal warriors that help fight infections and bacterias and viruses. They're huge role in cleaning and filtering out blood and interstitial fluid. Okay. The only other system I don't think that we mentioned was the reproductive. That was the only one that wasn't shown here. We will spend 1 week talking about reproductive system and the endocrine system. That's usually in week 4. So let's take a look at some of the quiz questions that I've seen show up in the past, just to kind of get you comfortable with what may show up on the Connect McGraw-Hill quiz, so that you're not like, oh my God, I didn't know we were responsible for that. Question I've locked out here on the top, but it would say, what is the highlighted structure? So we know we're looking at the skeletal system, but each of these has skeleton in it, so now we have to pick the best one. Is it the appendicular skeleton? Well, Dr. Lindner told you that the appendicular skeleton was the appendages, the upper and lower extremities, so it can't be that. Peripheral skeleton and central skeleton. Dr. Lindner never mentioned peripheral skeleton or central skeleton. What I did mention was peripheral neural system and central neural system, but I never used peripheral and central in reference to the skeleton, so we can cross those two out. And what we're left with is the axial skeleton. Everything here in that center in blue is axial. All right, now we're looking at the muscular system. What's the highlighted portion here? Is it the rectus muscle? Well, we haven't covered muscles, but most of us know that the rectus abdominis is here, so we can cross that out. Then there's axial muscles. Well, axial is everything that's not blue, so let's cross that out. Oblique muscles. Obliques are over here. They're called abdominal obliques. So it can't be that. So what we're left with is appendicular muscles. Okay, now we're looking at the nerves and the neural system, and what's blue is the central neural system, but it's not asking to name it. It's asking what is its function. And when I talked about sperm and egg coming together, we said at around day 18 forms the brain and spinal cord, which is the central neural system. That's the main Houston control. That controls everything. So it is the control center. Now, if it was asking about these, the peripheral neural system, well, those are the ones that are going to connect to muscles. Okay. All right, now we're looking at the endocrine portion. The endocrine portion. And it wants to know what's the highlighted structure, which is here. So let's name some of these other ones first. So here in the throat, that's the thyroid gland. Near the sternum is the thymus gland. The thymus gland that's where we get T cells for the white blood cell called T helper cells. Then we have our kidneys. And then above the kidneys, those are called adrenals, adrenal glands. And then here, right behind the thyroid, if we rotate the thyroid around on the posterior part or the backside, we have something called parathyroid glands. And the parathyroids, they're on the posterior side of the thyroid. The word posterior just means the backside. So you have to turn this around and look at it from the backside. Okay? And I'll get into these functions when we get into the endocrine system, but not now. It's too premature. Then we have the testes in the male, and in the female, we have the ovaries, we have the uterus, we have the fallopian tubes. So what do we have left? This blue structure. Is it the adrenals? No. Is it the liver? No. Is it the kidneys? No. It's the pancreas. The pancreas has a head, it has a body, and at the end it has a tail. And the pancreas is involved in regulating blood sugar. It can increase or decrease blood sugar. When we get into the endocrine system, we'll talk about how that happens. And it also produces digestive enzymes. The pancreas produces pancreatic protease to break down proteins, pancreatic carbohydrates to break down carbohydrates, and then pancreatic lipase to break down lipids. Anything that ends in ACE, ASE, is an enzyme. Enzymes speed up chemical reactions. That's what they do. So proteases break down proteins, carbohydrates break down carbohydrates, and lipases break down lipids. Let's take a look at this one. We're looking at the cardiovascular system, but it's asking what is the highlighted structure, the blue one right there, and pretty straightforward. We're talking about the heart. Okay, it's not the aorta. The aorta is that. That's the arch of the aorta. Thymus, trachea, can't be those. Okay, now we're looking at the respiratory tract. And remember, before I drew a line like this, separating the upper respiratory tract from the lower respiratory tract. So what's this highlighted blue structure? It's the upper respiratory tract. Okay. Now we're looking at parts of the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract or digestive tract, and it wants to know what's the blue structure. So everything in here that's blue is small intestine. This, going all the way around, is the large intestine. Large intestine is sometimes referred to as the colon. They're interchangeable. Here's your liver, and then here's your stomach. Okay. Okay, before, they wanted to know what this was. This was the small intestine, And now what is the highlighted blue structure? Well, it's not the small intestine, it is the large intestine. And again, here's the liver, and the stomach is going to be somewhere right in there. Okay, now we're still looking at the digestive tract, but it wants to know, what are these salivary glands, and what is the liver, and what is the pancreas? Well, these blue structures are not just the liver, it's not just the digestive tract, it's not just the salivary glands, but these are the accessory digestive organs. They're helpers in the game of digestion. Okay, let's take a break here.